We're here today to have a webinar that we're doing along with our partner Credivera. I'm here with Elena, and we're going to talk about seamless credential verification with Credivera and Microsoft Entra, and talk about how you can get started with verified credentials. Next slide. So our agenda for today, we'll first do introductions. I'm Mark Riley, Oxford Computer Group, Principal Architect. I'll introduce Elena in just a moment. We're going to talk about where Entra and Credivera come together, verified credentials and end users, how end users can use those credentials and what they're used for, use cases that are currently in production. We already have various use cases that Credivera is using. How does Credivera work? And then we've saved some time at the end for Q&A. But before we get to that, I want to start with just a quick overview of Oxford Computer Group. We'll let Elena do an introduction of Credivera if she chooses. Next slide, please. So Oxford Computer Group, we've been in identity and security for quite some time. As we say, a 20-year track record. I've only been here for half that, but quite a record. A lot of enterprise projects. We've been Partner of the Year any number of times. And three broad pillars: planning and assessment for identity, readiness, security reviews, deployment services. We do pilots and rollouts, integration with MIM, Savient, Software IDM, a couple other platforms that we're partnering with in the identity space, and also managed services that we run for our customers, whether that's help desk support, monitoring, third-party application, and in fact, we're also operating some systems for our customers in some sovereign clouds that they're unable to operate in. So that's Oxford Computer Group. I'm going to introduce you now to Elena Dumitrascu with Credivera, who's CTO for Credivera, and who will be leading the webinar today. Elena, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Elena Dumitrascu, CTO at Credivera. I have about 2 decades in the IT space as well, mostly focused on delivering global payment networks and supply chain networks. I founded Credivera along with my partner Dan 5 years ago because we felt that there is a white space need for verifications regarding employees and giving employers peace of mind that everything is in compliance, but also giving individuals peace of mind that this is their data, they have control over it, and they can share and revoke as needed. So with that said, let's get going. We'll tell you today about how Credivera is deploying this in production with various customers. This isn't a sales pitch, but we wanted to use a real life example of how this type of technology can be leveraged by organizations today. So the one use case I have, of course, under my control is the Credivera use case. So we'll be sharing with you how we've come to use this technology, why we chose it, and how our customers leverage it every day in their operations. We also have a couple of polls for you. Really curious to learn from the audience if you've come across these problems in your organizations or with your own customers. But this is the problem that our customers are facing. You know, individuals would show up to work, typically individuals that are frontline workers that deal with high risk environments. And they would come with binders of paper credentials. And these binders introduced 3 problems: a problem for the employer, not being sure if what's being presented is actually all that's required for that individual that day. A second problem around, is this data accurate? Is it fraudulent? Has it expired? A problem for the issuer. You know, in this paper world, once the credential is issued, you sort of lose touch with the person that took the training, and you definitely don't know where it's being used. So for issuers, they miss the opportunity for understanding which of their courses is, you know, being leveraged in industry the most, and the ability to market accordingly. And of course, the individual, we've seen time and time again where you would have to go back home because you're missing one of the critical certificates to be allowed on site that day. So now that individual is losing wages and can potentially miss not just the day shift, but like a 2-week shift. We see in a lot of industries, people sort of work 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So this is the time when I'd love to ask the audience a quick little poll. Does your organization or your customer use paper certifications today? Perfect, thank you so much. Oh, there you go, we're getting a couple more answers. So we're sort of seeing 33% saying yes, 22% saying I'm not sure. Oh, the numbers are going up. 40% saying yes, 40% saying no, and 20% saying they're not sure. Thank you so much for responding. This is pretty common depending on your job role. You may not know if your company does or doesn't use paper credentials. I can tell you from every job I've ever applied to, I've had to present ahead of time information in either paper format or a picture of it, or a PDF version of that, but all of those forms are really no better or no different than the paper itself. There's no ping back to the issuer, and there's no information in real time whether that credential is real and still in good standing. So this is the issue our customers were having, really struggling with verifying skills in real time and being able to deploy the right person to the right job on a daily basis. We introduced verifiable credentials, and we're an ISV. We are leveraging Microsoft to build our platform, and we've built this product, and this product has 2 aspects, as you can see in the image. There's a digital wallet that the individual controls. This is where they can store background check information, education, licenses and certifications, various professional memberships if they're an engineer or a cybersecurity expert, as well as occupational health. Often in manufacturing or oil and gas, individuals must have particular health-related credentials, such as an audiometric test or a drug and alcohol test. So all of those are now available in a digital format in the control of the worker, and the ability to share with their employer. So on the right side of the screenshots, you can see now this is what the employer gets to see on a daily basis at a glance. Are all the workers fit to work or not? And this information comes straight from the issuer. So what's really magical about verifiable credentials is the original issuer, the employer, and the holder of that credential are connected in real time, so that every day before you show up to work, a ping can be made to that issuer and a response is returned to say, still in good standing. So I'm going to ask another poll question, and it's around if your organization has brought up an interest in automating verifications for the staff. Very interesting numbers coming across. We're seeing about 70%, 75% now saying yes, that your organization has looked at automating the verification process. And, if there's something that I've seen as a major transformation is the last couple of years, where organizations do indeed realize that they may never even meet their staff member face to face. Everything happens remotely. Individuals get hired remotely and work remotely. So having the ability to digitally verify, not just at hire, but post-hire, like I mentioned, every day before the person is allowed to access a system or access a secure room, or start that truck. Organizations are looking to automate that process and digitize it and reduce compliance risks. So in our use case, again, with Credivera, what our customers get to have right now is the ability to see in real time that all of the conditions are met for a particular job. If you're an engineer, your professional designation is verified, your insurance is verified, specific training that you may have. Let's say maybe you have to work in a building, so working at heights is really critical. All of those get verified in real time. Now, I mentioned we chose Microsoft for this, and Mark and I were talking about this as we were getting ready for this webinar around why did we choose Microsoft? So, as I mentioned, we started this journey about 5 years ago, and we actually built our own infrastructure for verifiable credentials. We tested a few other products in the early days, and some of the products that we tested leveraged blockchain technology, and realized that there was a real hurdle when it came to user adoption and enterprise adoption for those early infrastructure solutions. Microsoft came to market with a product called Entra Verified ID. This is a system that works like any other Microsoft service. And, I often say, just like we don't build firewalls from scratch and database from scratch, I simply go into my Azure portal and request the service. This is how easy it's become for us to leverage verifiable credentials through Microsoft Entra Verified ID. I can simply log into the service, make the request, configure it, and now I can build software on top of that my customers get to license just as easily as they can license any SaaS product. What's really also cool about and why we chose Microsoft is their product is standards-based. So the World Wide Web Consortium, they created a standard way back in the day, which of course we're all familiar with, around HTML and CSS. The next big standard that they've released has been around verifiable credentials. So as a web standard, this ensures that any system that builds technology that leverages verifiable credentials becomes compatible with any other system. So just like we can all now load an HTML page on any browser, these web standards ensure that our technologies are compatible with each other. So if I have a customer that uses Credivera for verifiable credentials and that digital wallet, that customer is not locked into Credivera. They can choose to move their data through a simple QR code scan into any other digital wallet and continue to use that data to do those daily real-time verifications. So for us, having Microsoft provide this service, having their engineering and security team keep up with all the emerging web standards around this service was a huge, huge win. So we can focus on what we do best, which is, of course, build software. We don't want to be, building infrastructure and ensuring that it's compatible with everything else that's coming on the market. So what we get out of the box is what's called a self-sovereign wallet, which gives the individual that ability to control their data, to share, and revoke that sharing as needed. We get to give our users and their employers those real-time notifications that say everything is in order. You can come to work. What we've actually noticed is these credentials form digital identities about an individual. So for us, verifiable credentials have become a very sound approach to zero trust cybersecurity, where an individual can use these pieces of data to access a room or access a system in real time, with that verification happening in real time for them. Now I'm going to talk about the Microsoft Authenticator a little bit, and I'd love to know from the room who is using Microsoft Authenticator today, whether it's your own organization or one of your customers. Okay, we're starting to see around 70 to 80% of participants saying, yes, you use Authenticator today. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your responses. So we do too at Credivera, and our customers use it with Credivera or independently. And if you look at your Authenticator app right now, you're probably really familiar with the first tab, but in the bottom right corner, you'll notice there's a new tab called Entra Verified IDs. And this is where all of those verifiable credentials can be stored if you use Microsoft Authenticator today. So in this use case, I'm presenting an employee ID type verifiable credential. And we use at Credivera these types of IDs to actually do passwordless access into third-party software as well as room access. These verifiable credentials are issued by the organization, so you can do it for your organization without Credivera. It's out of the box. Like I said, it's a native Microsoft solution, and you can start issuing these employee IDs to your staff and your customers. Mark will talk a little bit later about how Oxford can help as well. But we use it, as you can see on the screenshot. I can use my Microsoft Authenticator, scan the QR code, and log into the system. What's really neat to mention here is that there's no traditional SAML federation happening. So from the ability to stand up a service like this and the ability to remove some of the hurdles that SAML introduces, this becomes a really favorable option when you're considering passwordless access for your staff into either a cyber asset or a physical asset like a room. And lastly, because it's running on the Microsoft stack, we feel that this is deployable leveraging today's IT capabilities. I should mention that verifiable credentials are emerging with a lot of industry leaders at the time, but because of the existing enterprise footprint that Microsoft has, and the fact that the service is already compatible with those emerging web standards, with Microsoft security, for us, this was a really attractive choice to leverage within our product and within our customer base. Mark, I'll turn it over to you for just a sec.
So yeah, I think this is a reasonable question. So why would end users want to use VCs? Well, the biggest thing I think for them, and Elena, you certainly should comment on this, is that it's in the user's control. All of the fine-grained details of this aren't available yet in the service from Microsoft, but ultimately the goal is that we'll be able to provide the credentials that we wish to that verifier, the user who's going to verify my credential, what actual information I provide to them. And one of the classic examples is that I may need to prove that I completed a series of course, maybe got a degree somewhere. Maybe I want to share the fact that I have completed that course or have gotten the degree, but I don't want to share my grade point average from that. And so we'll be able to selectively choose which components of a verified credential I can share with that employer or what other vendor might be. Allows me to take that credential and without having to work with my employer or school of record or any of those kinds of things, I can present that. So as Elena said, no SAML federation required, no real contracts between anybody. I can take that record from my schooling and provide it to any employer or potential employer that I want to. So I think those are those are really attractive use cases for end users. There is a bit of a learning curve in how you use them and how you present them. I think a lot of what Credivera does makes that easier for the end user as well, but it still leaves the control with the end user. Elena?
Absolutely. And, you know, I think COVID taught us all how to scan a QR code and present. And, you know, the challenge for all of us developing wallets is exactly that, to make it super seamless, super easy for an individual to claim this data, to add it to their wallet, and then to present it as needed. So we definitely believe at Credivera that people deserve credit for the knowledge that they have, and they should proudly display it. And the reader should be able to trust what they're looking at without having to do any kind of, you know, back-end verification. So this real-time connection to the issuer is really critical, and those web standards I was talking about that enable these systems, you know, I could be coming with a Credivera wallet and my digital credential, and I can present it to employer X that's running a completely different system. They should be able to scan that seamlessly and see the verified result coming across in real time. And later in this presentation, I'll be showing you an example of exactly how that works. Here's an example. If any of you guys want to check out my LinkedIn profile, under my credentials and certifications, I've actually linked one of my training credentials. And when you click on show credential, you can actually see all the proof behind that, as well as the status. So the action of clicking show credential makes a call to the issuer, and at the top it will either say verified or expired or revoked. Now think about that doctor that's entering an operating room. With today's identity and access management solutions, you're probably only checking one aspect, which is, does this doctor work at this hospital? But what if their license was revoked? Or what if their insurance was expired? With verifiable credentials and the ability to link them together, that doctor, when they go to badge into that operating room, can receive a real-time notification on all of the dimensions that are relevant to them performing that job. Do they have a valid license? Do they have the right insurance? Do they have the additional training to be in the operating room? And do they work at that hospital? So verifiable credentials have the ability to source this data from third parties in real time and present it to the reader in real time with the most up-to-date status. So I wanted to talk about what's happening beyond Credivera and beyond Oxford Group. We are seeing governments around the world deploying these types of solutions, not just for citizen identity, but also for supply chain identity. We often hear, you know, do I know where this product came from? Do I understand whether, you know, where it was built, how it was built, when it entered the country? So we're seeing both Canada and the US right now deploying verifiable credentials to support individuals, to support citizens, to be able to prove citizenship, to be able to prove valid mobile driver's licenses, but to also be able to prove supply chain transactions that link, just like we talked a lot here about an individual linking their identities. In a supply chain scenario, being able to link business identities and asset identities so that ultimately the recipient of that asset can see all this data in real time and know that it's not been tampered with. So I just wanted to ask another polling question, and then I'll talk a bit more about each of these use cases that we're starting to see across the various governments around the world. Thank you so much for answering. We're seeing a 67% yes, that you've come across digital identity solutions so far. And this is similar to what we're seeing as well. A couple of years ago, this would have been more like 10%, but this industry is growing at an incredible pace across the globe. So just to recap, in the US, the Department of Homeland Security is looking at this solution for, as I mentioned, supply chain, driver's licenses, and citizen identity. In Canada, the Treasury Department is looking at this again for citizen identity, business identity, healthcare, driver's licenses, and supply chain. Also in Canada, there is a group that's been formed called the Digital Identity Council of Canada that's brought together private and public entities to work towards these solutions that can be compatible across the globe. And they've actually established, they're working on establishing what's called a trust framework and a registry that would form that trusted set of authorized issuers for Canada. And in the EU, we're seeing a new program launch called EID, which is meant to give all European citizens the ability to have a unified European citizenship, or not citizenship, but unified European digital identity that they can use in any European country to go to school, to get a job, to cross the border. So governments at the highest level are looking to deploy these solutions to give both individuals and businesses peace of mind that if you're entering into a digital transaction with either a business or an individual, you can trust that the party at the other end of that transaction is who they say they are, and the data that they're presenting you has not been tampered with. I know even for us at Credivera, we have a number of vendors that we interact with on a monthly basis, and we've seen so many phishing attacks where somebody's pretending to be someone else and saying, hey, guess what? My banking information has changed. Start depositing your payments into this new bank account. That then, of course, creates an audit requirement internally where we have to confirm that this is legitimate, and verifiable credentials really eliminate that to 100%, because you can always trust that the other party is who they claim to be, and the bank account they're giving you is the bank account that belongs to them, their contact information is legitimate, and so on. So I'm going to show you now a couple of examples of how Credivera has deployed this. In this first example, for the last couple of years, we've been working with the Canadian government as well as 2 additional partners, and the logos here represent our 2 partners, with one being Entra Canada, the other one being Mavennet, and of course Credivera. We demonstrated sort of an end-to-end example of using verifiable credentials to bring proof about an individual as well as an asset, and to also bring proof around how an individual can move their data between wallets. As I mentioned, it's really critical that people don't really get locked into a product. If this is their data and their identity, they should be able to put it in their wallet of choice. So in this example, we started with the individual having a verifiable driver's license in their Interac wallet. Being able to use that data as foundational identity, Mark mentioned how you have the ability to do selective disclosure. So part of their driver's license was shared with their training provider, where they were able to gain an inspector license. These 2 pieces of identity later in the workflow get used to be able to show that this inspector has indeed verified an asset. We had our partners from Mavennet issue verifiable credentials as they pertain to an asset that originated in Canada. The inspector used Credivera to perform an asset inspection and created a VC tied to that asset inspection. And then Credivera took all of this data and created what's called a verifiable presentation, which had information about the inspector as well as the asset and the inspection to say, yes, I was here, I'm a verified inspector, I performed this inspection on this date, and I can confirm that this asset was built in Canada. The asset was taken over the border to the US and presented to the border agent to, again, in a digital format, being able to see all of this history about the inspector as well as the asset, and ultimately received by the purchaser in the US. What was also critical in this demonstration was to show that the individual gave their consent before their data was shared. So we've talked quite a bit today here around how much control a person has over their data. Even if they work for company X, if company X wants to share details about them with another party, the individual has the ability to give consent before that data is shared. Now think about this versus today's scenario where you give to an organization a copy of your driver's license and you have no idea where that copy is stored or who sees it after the fact. Verifiable credentials put you in control, put you behind the steering wheel, and give you as the individual control over where and how your data is being displayed and shared. So this is a project, again, that we did with the Government of Canada, along with our partners, to prove how this new technology can be used and how data can move. I should mention there was no integration between Credivera, Interac, and Mavennet. All of this happened through that QR code scan and share. We really wanted to show how the web standards and the technologies that were deployed are compatible out of the box. And here's an example of how a Credivera customer leverages the Entra Verified ID to actually give an individual permission to enter a job site. So at the very start, I showed you the screenshots of what the front end looks like. Here's a bit of the behind the scenes. So within the Credivera platform, two companies can create a relationship. Through that relationship, one company can assign a project to another company. They can assign an individual to that project. That's when their identity VC can be issued. The user can use that identity to log in to that site. They can use that profile to add additional identities like an inspector license, and then ultimately present all of this data to company B to be allowed to perform the job that they've been hired for. So for us, we leverage Entra Verified ID for each of these interactions to collect proofs about the individual and ultimately to present those proofs to give that person access to a secure job site. As mentioned already, we have an established exchange for verifiable credentials. This is running in production. These are some of the companies that are working with us today. You may recognize some of these logos. These companies are either employers or authorized issuers, and through the Credivera exchange, they connect in real time and perform these verifications on a daily basis for tens of thousands of users that are currently connected to the system. So yeah, a couple of years ago, probably a lot of us would have wondered, what is digital identity? How does it work? We saw this article not too long ago in Forbes magazine that talked about identity today is where financial services were 15 years ago, representing the largest opportunity of this generation. You're going to start seeing more and more organizations ask for this, especially as we try to tap into a global market, not just for supply chain, but for hiring individuals and dealing more and more in digital transactions to support enterprise growth. And this is where the fun part starts. We invite you to ask us questions. And we have a couple that we queued out for you here. Mark and I are going to have a little conversation. And please use the webinar chat to ask us your questions. But Mark, why don't we start with this one?
Yes, so I think this is an interesting question, right? I mean, this is a very interesting space, particularly in identity where we work. How do we get started with our verifiable credentials? I think Microsoft has made that easy. That as we were talking about earlier, now in the Azure portal, we can get the verified credentials as verified credentials are part of Microsoft's Entra product marketing SKU or whatever it is, the group of products that are put under Entra. You can also go to entra.microsoft.com, log in directly, and have a smaller subset of those pieces. I think that's a great way to get started. Providing your company, creating a credential for your company. Microsoft has, as we see in the Authenticator app, Microsoft has a presentation layer for verified credentials, which may not always be used. There are use cases, as Elena talked about, these use cases where a business may hold a wallet for a user and verify those credentials each time the user shows up, or each day prior to the start of work, or prior to a 2-week engagement, or whatever it might be, that the user may not see all of those presentation elements. But it's important, I think, to understand how to create that credential, how users can consume that credential. It is a bit of a new learning process, instead of being simply that I have a username and credential, or username and password. Now I have this credential, which is all wrapped up and provided to someone to prove whatever it is that I'm trying to prove, all of the things that Elena talked about. So I think getting into Azure, where they've kind of wrapped all this stuff up, they create all of the security principles for you, create well, if you build your website in there, they'll create the SSL search for you and everything. So all those things are in there in Azure to help you get started with this. And I know Credivera has places where people can get started, Elena.
Absolutely, and we have a couple of questions related to that. Yes, Credivera is a SaaS solution, and the next question is, how do issuers ensure that requests are made from genuine requesters? Very good question. So an issuer and a holder, as we call them, the person that has the credential, have a pre-established relationship. You have to go to school X, or you have to take training Y, or you're employed by company Z. So the issuer should always know who the legitimate requesters are, and the issuer would present those legitimate holders with a QR code that they can scan and claim their verifiable credentials. So those QR codes are not just, published on the web somewhere. They're published through an issuer portal where each individual can go and make claims. Credivera has a pre-established network of issuers. We have around 10,000 authorized issuers right now in our network that have these pre-established relationships with the holders, so people can claim right out of their Credivera wallet a credential. And I know Microsoft is working on a larger verifiable credential network where existing businesses that run through Azure can become trusted issuers that again can publish those QR codes, and individuals can make claims against. There's another question around, yes, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, and I was just going to say that there really isn't, I think the question might come a bit from a security perspective, like how do I trust that this is really a requester? But the fact is, and I did a webinar a few weeks ago, one of the slides, and I don't want to interrupt the flow here to bring it up, but it was kind of a trust diagram. So the issuer of this verified credential trusts the user because the user has either signed in, or I know that user, or something else has transpired that I trust the user and I grant them that verified credential. The user then trusts the verifier because they present the credential to the verifier. And so there's something that either I want to work for these people or I need to present this. There's something that I trust about that verifier. And then the verifier must trust the issuer if they're going to go check and validate against that. And that is, I think, the one piece in this whole setup that might require some offline work where you set up and say, okay, I trust MIT to provide that. Now, Microsoft's trying to, as Elena said, Microsoft's trying to help build that trust by allowing you, when you create your verified credentials, to verify your domain. So I have created verified credentials in one of our test tenants called OCG Dev. I have verified that domain. If I present a credential from that domain, from OCG Dev, it will show up in the Microsoft system. It will show up as a verified provider. That is, I've proved that I own that domain name, very similar to how you put custom domain names within Azure. You prove that you have ownership of that domain, and that kind of becomes verified. And so you can trust them a little bit more. If Microsoft says, yes, this URL really does belong to MIT, and we verified that, I have a pretty high level of trust in that. So though I think that's a good point to how these are verified, but there isn't the structure that there might be in SAML where you do where you have to set up this federation, you have to exchange credentials, you have to trust certificates, all of those things that go into it. I think one of the we don't have a question on this, but I'd like to bring it up to you, Elena. I think one of the interesting things that I just realized kind of as you're going through this, even though I've heard the way that you're using verified credentials before, is this is an interesting way. People have talked for quite a while about putting things on the blockchain, whatever it is, right? Put romaine lettuce on the blockchain so we can tell when there's an E. coli event, we can figure out what all the lettuce is.
Mm-hmm.
And in that perspective, from the presentation you did, this is kind of a useful user experience, UX as it is, to the blockchain.
Absolutely.
Can you talk to that at all?
Absolutely. I mean, I talk about how we started this journey 5 years ago, and we started with that, and we had a really hard time getting our customers to get on the ledger. They were like, what's a ledger? I don't want to support this infrastructure. What's beautiful about this is all of that information, the guts of verifiable credentials are completely abstracted from those who implement these kinds of solutions. And to the end user, whether it's the IT department or the HR manager or the worker themselves, it feels like any other web app. None of the complicated ledger components come into play. Some VCs don't even rely on a ledger, as Mark mentioned. There is one type of VC that just works because the identifier is tied to your domain. And as long as you can prove that you're the rightful owner of domain X, you can start issuing and signing those transactions with that domain and exchange them across the internet through a web page. So all the complicated early days ledger complexities are completely non-existent with today's VC deployments. A couple more questions from the audience, and then we'll talk about who should be involved in deploying something like this. Is there a pro bono service, or are there transaction costs? Thank you for that question. With Credivera, there is a cost, not per transaction, but per seat. So we license our product to enterprises, and they purchase a certain number of seats. In some cases, we waive the cost of the implementation in order to enable that growth of the network. So I guess both a freemium as well as a paid opportunity exists. For those that want to leverage Microsoft Entra within the portal, for that employee ID scenario, I'm not familiar with the cost from Microsoft for that service today. The next question is around, can you speak to how VCs enhance the security and privacy of someone's data, as well as reduce the risk of data breach impacts? This is a really good question, and thank you for it. All of this information is encrypted end-to-end, and only the user has a private key that can decrypt this data. So in my example on LinkedIn, I chose as the holder of that credential to post it publicly unencrypted. But if I choose to not share publicly, to only share one by one, like as an instance, share with my employer or share via email, all of that information is encrypted, and I hold the key to decrypt it and share it. So in the case of Credivera, we don't actually even see any of this data. It's encrypted end to end. It's only visible to the user and those that the user choose to share it with, which eliminates any kind of concerns around data breach impacts. Now, Mark, let's talk a bit about who needs to be involved in planning an organization if they choose to deploy VCs.
Yeah, I think this is kind of an important question from my perspective, because I've spent my career around IT, and be farmed out to accounting when I have to do billing questions and provide reports to them, and work with HR on other pieces. But this is really kind of a thing that I see, and I don't know that I'm correct, but I see this as being much more driven outside of IT. Now, IT still has to support this, and this goes back to one of my central themes that I started my work in computers under information systems. We moved to IT, and now we're kind of back to services again. But a lot of this is going to be more interesting to the people who will consume these credentials than the technical work of putting together this architecture and the structure to support all of this. So I think a lot of this is going to be driven from HR, from the hiring perspective, from anywhere that you'd see credentials. I think it's an important piece. I see us using it down the line to verify who can join these kinds of meetings, not public webinars per se, but meetings that we have internally or with customers or partners, that instead of having to create this massive structure of business to business communication where we have temporary credentials inside my tenant and inside my authentication piece, that we can just take these essentially third-party credentials and say, yep, I know that my partner company granted them that credential. I trust my partner company, and that's enough for us to sit down and have a discussion. So I think it really is talking to the people who are going to facilitate these connections, whether they be B2B or B2C, business to consumer. This is a great play for consumers, the ability to, so maybe your marketing team, the ability to offer your customers the ability to get a discount by presenting this credential because they're a customer of yours and someone you partner with. So there's lots of places where this will touch, and although it is an IT function, it really probably will not be driven from IT. So you need to look for partners that are in HR, that are in marketing, that can see the value of this, and you can bring to it from an IT perspective. I don't know where everyone is. We didn't ask that poll question. But you can bring that from an IT perspective. How can we bring that into the organization and kind of reduce the load on identity and bringing all of these additional identities in simply so we can authenticate somebody for a simple use case like sharing a document, joining a meeting, having access to a website, any of those things.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought up those two examples because I have customers that are actually using it for both of those. One is around subcontractor management, where you hire company X, they send Bob to do some work for you. You onboard Bob, and now company X has let go Bob, but Bob is coming to your work site the next day because he wants to do something bad with a VC. That happens in real time. You don't need company X to remember to notify you and then engage HR, operations, IT, etc. The notification, the VC gets disabled in real time, and Bob will not be able to access that room or access that software if they're no longer an employee of that subcontractor. I've also seen it, you talked about discounts. You know, if you're a member of a particular association or if you are a union member, you may get discounts for things like telecom. But if you have not paid your dues and you're now not an active member of that association or union, you can still call that telecom provider and say, hey, I'm calling for the discount, you know, XYZ. They have no way of knowing that you're no longer a member in good standing, so they continue to provide those discounts. So valid points you brought up, Mark. I've seen both of them come across, and I've seen how VCs can really help in both of those instances.
Well, that's great. I think we're through all our questions.
That's right.
Thank you very much, Elena, for presenting today. I think it was a real eye-opener for me. I mean, I've thought of things that I hadn't thought of, even though we've talked about this multiple times. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate everyone's time on the webinar.
Thank you so much. There is one more question. May I answer it, or should we wrap up?
Please.
It just came in. Thank you for the question. How does Credivera use a VC as a digital profile on a construction site to support pre-access onto a job site? So thank you for asking this. We actually have construction companies using our service, and they have that QR code at the gate, and individuals can scan as they come to site, or they can scan ahead of time. We know that some construction sites don't allow digital phones, so individuals can scan that QR code online ahead of time and present their credentials, so that when they and the site manager knows when they see Bob that Bob's been pre-cleared, because the site manager has a dashboard that shows this and can say, okay, Bob, come on in. Or it can happen in real time if a cell phone is permitted, where Bob can scan the QR code at the gate and access the site. I hope that that answer satisfies the question. And I believe that's the last question as far as I can see in the chat here.
There was a question, is Credivera a SaaS solution?
Yes, it is. Yes, we are.
And I think I missed another question. I think I may have deleted it. I'm not too familiar with the environment here, so I apologize. But again, Thank everyone for your time. I think that's a wrap for us.
Thank you, Mark. It was really fun to chat with you today, and thank you everybody for attending. We look forward to hearing more questions from you. If you'd like to follow up with Oxford Group or Credivera, you know where to find us. Thank you.